Hi, I'm Cindy Morales, and this is the Shout My Story podcast, where we share stories of women who choose life in difficult circumstances and the people who help them. If you enjoy this content, please like, subscribe, and share our YouTube channel, Shout My Story. You can also listen on the Spotify and Apple podcasts. Now, let's get to our guest. Sandi and her husband, Adam, are the proud parents of 6 kids, and the youngest, Tabitha, has trisomy 18. And she's involved in raising awareness about Simon's Law. Sandi, if I wanted to share stories of women who had T18 kids, I would never run out of stories. I have so many women who want to share their story. And so many moms are eager to raise awareness because of the difficulties they run into when they get pregnant and they're given this diagnosis and they're, so often told to abort. Once the kids are born, they're not offered the right support. So I'm going to go through your story and you can share your particulars with me. Did you know that you had a baby with trisomy 18 before she was born?
No, we didn't know. We were, in our 40s, so we were geriatric maternity, and I already had experience with 5 pregnancies, and I knew what I wanted and didn't want, and did not want an OB telling me I couldn't have a home birth. So we didn't do any testing other than, monitoring my blood pressure and the baby's heart rate. So we actually had it was my best pregnancy.
You didn't go for an ultrasound or anything like that the whole pregnancy?
Nope, no ultrasounds, nothing.
And you had a home birth?
And we had a home birth. Yep.
Was this your first home birth?
Nope, it was third, sort of. It was my third midwife birth, second home birth.
Okay. So I wanted to ask you what the reaction to the hospital staff, but that's not an appropriate question.
So here I'll tell you. So what happened was we had a home birth, and she ended up presenting breech. So the midwives were required to call EMS. We did successfully deliver just before they arrived on scene. And because she came out way smaller than expected, the first thing they heard the midwife say was, "Oh my gosh, we got to check for twins." And midwives are not allowed to knowingly deliver twins. So they loaded us up and hauled us off to the hospital to possibly deliver a twin. So once we got to the hospital, we were in ER, they checked, no twin, checked her vitals, and she was doing great. And so we're like, fine, we're going home. And so at that point, they actually bullied us with CPS and threatened us with CPS if we did not let her be admitted to NICU. So we came to a consensus, and we said, sure, she could go to NICU as long as I get to hold her and try to nurse her. And so they let us do that. And I refused to be admitted, so I wasn't a patient for them to control. So we went to NICU, and we got to NICU, and they gave her full stabilizing care because we didn't have a prenatal diagnosis or anything. So they, gave her oxygen, gave her a heat lamp. Took a while. They finally got an IV and eventually an NG tube. Then they brought in all the ultrasound equipment, and they thoroughly checked all of her organs for any kind of defects, checked her from head to toe. I mean, this is what every child deserves: the full stabilizing care, the full evaluation. And after about 12 hours of all this, they came and sat down with us and said, well, we can't find anything wrong with her, but we're pretty sure based on markers that she has trisomy 18. So if you want to choose comfort care and just take her home and let her die at this point, that's okay.
Wow. And how did you react to that?
Well, I've been awake for over 36 hours at this point, and it was whiplash because, at first they threatened us with CPS because we didn't know what we were doing. And then now it's like, oh, okay, you can take her home. And it was shocking. But, our attitude, being it was our 6th child and we've learned a lot, was, well, if doing things your way means getting a dead baby, then we're not doing things your way. We're getting out of here and, pursuing alternative options here.
Okay, so usually babies with trisomy 18 do need a lot of medical interventions when they're born. What did Tabitha need?
She didn't need anything. We were able to, the only thing they could find was a heart murmur. Her holes in her heart were so small they couldn't even see those on the NICU echocardiogram. They had to send her to the cardiologist to actually find those. So we were able to wean her off of oxygen, wean her off the IV, all of that within 24 hours. And so with the NG tube, which, saved her life, because she was no bigger than American Girl doll. I mean, she was still 4 pound, 2.3 ounces. Nursing was too hard for her. But we struggled because we didn't go home with oxygen. We didn't go home with a feed pump. We were gravity feeding, which is ridiculous. We had to hold an open syringe and let it gravity feed. And if you fell asleep and spilled, then you had to start over. And so we struggled for about 10 weeks doing gravity feed. And I mentioned to the cardiologist that this was crazy. And so she got us into the GI, and we got a continuous feed pump so we could feed her, around the clock.
And she's being fed with an NG tube.
She's got the NG tube down her nose. That's about it. They sent us home. This is the other crazy thing. They told us that, kids with trisomy 18, don't live more than 2 months. They'll die of SIDS. What do you plan to do if you find that she's not breathing? And we're like, well, we're going to resuscitate her. What else would you do? And they're like, oh, okay. Maybe you want a monitor. Yeah, that would be nice. So they sent us home with an apnea monitor, which isn't a very helpful piece of equipment because it doesn't have any gauges or numbers or anything. It just blares when something's wrong. So you don't know if it's blaring because the child has stopped breathing, or it's blaring because it came unplugged and the batteries lost its juice, or you don't know if the sensors came off. And so, every time it blared, you're like, oh my gosh, she's dead. And then you're like, oh no, she's sitting there smiling and chewing on the sensor,
Since they thought she was going to die in 2 months, did they recommend hospice?
Yeah, they recommend comfort care. So basically hospice. And it was really frustrating because, every first encounter we had with everybody, so they were really good because we chose full care. NICU set up everything. So we didn't have to be on a wait list for seeing the specialists. We didn't have to be on a wait list for therapy. They set everything up for us because we said we wanted it. But it didn't matter whether it was the home health nurse or whomever, or the pediatrician. Our first encounter was always, now, have you been told that you can do comfort care? At what point would you like a DNR? How far are you going to go? Do you really want to put her on a ventilator if she's not breathing? Or do you, where are you going to draw the line? And it's like, we're not drawing a line. We're giving her every opportunity to live and thrive. And, after a couple months, it became obvious that her heart defects were hindering her ability to grow and thrive. And so thanks to SOFT and the doctors on there, we were encouraged to reach out to Dr. James Hamill, who at the time was in Omaha, Nebraska. And so as soon as we got a hold of him, he was like, well, I want her yesterday. Get her over here now. And so we got her the heart repair, and things started to improve.
So you went to the University of Nebraska at Lincoln to have that done?
No, Omaha
it's
Children's.
Omaha. Yeah. It's Omaha Children's Hospital. I thought
Correct.
he was at UNL, which is in Omaha.
He was teaching. Yeah, he was teaching there as well.
Okay.
So he was a busy
So for
bug.
people who don't know, SOFT is support for trisomy, but what does the O stand for? Is it just support for trisomy?
Yes, it support organization for trisomy.
Oh, there you go. Okay. It was founded by Dr. John Carey, and I cannot remember the name of the other person who founded it. And it's for trisomy 18 and trisomy 13.
And any other related conditions, pretty much. So that was a great wealth of information.
So once she had the heart surgery, she started to gain weight and develop. Kids with trisomy 18 have developed very slowly. So, did you have any other challenges, or did she just pretty much sail from there?
Everything was, like you said, a lot slower than anticipated. But it was an improvement. It was just hard to see. And because of all the negative stuff we were told, I mean, we were on pins and needles her entire first year of life. I mean, it was a lot of anticipatory grief. When is she going to die? Well, how are we going to handle this? Living in fear and not really enjoying the moment. We were ecstatic to celebrate her first birthday. We called it an unfuneral. Had a big, huge party, and we started, the older kids, were having to be extra cautious and whatnot. And so we started to realize that, we were not living, even though we were keeping her alive. We were just kind of hunkered down and not doing anything. So we started venturing out and doing more stuff. And then she did get a respiratory virus shortly after, a couple months after turning 1, that landed her in the hospital because she needed oxygen. And that was January of 2020. Okay. And so she had 2 very serious respiratory viruses that were known to cause pneumonia, which she's at high risk of, not because of the trisomy 18, but because of her tiny airways and her low muscle tone. So she can't cough and expel very well on her own. And that was when we really started experiencing the discrimination, because they were, I was like, well, what about her pneumonia? And they go, the respiratory therapist said she'd have to look at her chest x-ray. I said, she hasn't gotten a chest x-ray. How do I get a chest x-ray? And so I asked about a chest x-ray, and the attending was like, well, we decided, without talking to you, that it would be best if we didn't expose her to unnecessary radiation. So we're not going to do a chest x-ray. We're not going to check for pneumonia. And, because she's not going to live anyways. So I'm like, hello, let's treat her for pneumonia, because you can treat it and see how long she lives. And so she did not have pneumonia. We got discharged within a couple days and finally got set up with oxygen at home, which was a blessing, because what happened a couple months later. Getting your hands on oxygen became very difficult. And so it was nice to finally have a pulse oximeter and oxygen at home so we could manage respiratory viruses at home.
And so other than that, does she have a G-tube still to eat?
Yes, she did eventually. Just before her first birthday, we finally got her a G-tube, because, I was so hopeful that, within weeks of her heart surgery that we could get her oral feeding, and it just progressed too slowly, and it was a struggle. So, we decided finally to just get the G-tube, and it's been a blessing in a lot of ways. I really don't worry so much about her because she's G-tube fed. She actually eats healthier than everybody else because there's no reason for her to be eating junk food. So her ability to fight off to her immune system, I feel, is pretty good. I do get concerned if she does get a respiratory virus that it will hit her harder, but I'm not as concerned about her getting sick as I was her first year.
How old is she now?
She is 6 years old.
6 years old. Okay. So tell me, what's a typical day for Tabitha now at 6 years old?
So she'll get up. Actually, I'll get up about 8 and plug her in for breakfast, and she can just eat and sleep. And it takes about 2 hours to feed her 14 ounces. 14 ounces? Yeah, 14 ounces of blended food. And then I get her up and get her dressed, and she loves to be in her bouncer. She has, so she loves, and so she'll really exercise. She'll jump up and down and bounce and play for a couple of hours. And then I will, somewhere in the day, I'll blend another batch of food. I usually blend a day's worth at a time.
Does she, so she's eating like regular, pureed food?
Yep. Yep.
She did. Okay. All right. Because I was imagining something like Ensure or Pediash, whatever they give kids.
Nope.
Okay. Cool.
Nope. So yeah, by my third child, I was making my own baby food because, it was getting expensive. So it's basically the same thing, just more watered down. So And so she eats a lot of single ingredient stuff. She doesn't eat exactly the same thing as us, so a lot of whole foods, a lot of whole fruits and vegetables, and simple proteins.
Okay. And then does she have any other activities? Does she have any therapies that she does, like physical therapy?
At the moment, no, because, I homeschool, all the kids are here. She gets a lot of interaction, a lot of physical activity. Siblings are fun because they really actually push a disabled child a lot more than other people were willing to, because they know them better. She's 6, so she's just as ornery and self-centered and conniving as any other 6-year-old, and her siblings know it, so they'll push her and make her do things. So she gets a lot of physical therapy, just by interacting with them.
Most kids with trisomy 18, they're not verbal. Does Tabitha have any speech?
No speech. So funny thing, I mean, she talks like an infant. Mm-hmm. She's got different sounds for different things, of course, and then you watch her facial expressions. A good example is we have friends who have 12 kids, and so they've been through the baby phase, 12 times, and we were visiting them, and Tabitha was making some noise, was communicating, and the dad was like, "Oh, this is what she's saying," because he's been through the baby phase 10 times. He understands babies. Yep.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's hard. A lot of people try to do sign language or switch technology, but all that involves muscle tone, and she's getting a lot stronger, but it's still she's still a little, still is on the weaker side for her age. Mm-hmm. So
I wanted to ask you, so it doesn't sound like she's had a lot of really difficult medical challenges, just kind of the normal ones.
Correct. Yeah. And she's been pretty easy. The periodic serious respiratory viruses, those land her in the hospital. She was hospitalized this spring with a really bad respiratory virus and needing extra oxygen.
So when she gets sick, her, like what would be a normal cold for us could land her in the hospital because of her difficulties.
Because of her clogged airways, yeah. Because of her tiny airways, and she's doing a lot better at being able to expel herself. When you have a special needs child, you celebrate and rejoice at some of the things that you wouldn't have thought you would celebrate and rejoice. So after she got out of the hospital last time, she sneezed real bad, had this big long trail of snot, and that was exciting because she expelled on her own. I didn't have to suction it out. You used to, back before we had kids, seeing snot-nosed kids, you thought that, oh, gross, but not for me. If she's all snot-nosed, that means she's clearing it out on her own. This is great. This is something to celebrate.
Does she like to do, does she have anything like that she really likes to do that your kids obviously they're probably playing with her a lot. What does she really like to do?
Well, she really likes to bounce, a lot of, stimulation and input.
What about music?
Somewhat. She's hearing impaired and she won't keep her hearing aids in. But she really, really loves bouncing. And she knows when the springs are at the wrong tension and she doesn't like it, and she lets you know. And she enjoys being on the trampoline with them. And we're starting to get her, now that she can sit up on her own, we're trying to get her, we have horses, so we try and get her out on horses, and she's learning to tolerate the animals. But her favorite thing absolutely is bouncing. She could bounce all day.
Does she have a gait trainer? Is she learning how to walk? Not
yet. She does really good in her exerciser. She can, walk in circles in it.
Cool.
So she has the mechanics for it. But we're still trying to, push her to crawl first. And so she's kind of getting there. She'll do like a commando crawl, a few steps and whatnot. But she does get an opportunity, like I said, in the bouncer, to really exercise her legs and being in that weight bearing position for her hips and all that.
One of the things that I've heard other parents of T18 kids say is that these are people who get the diagnosis before birth. The doctors will say to them, "Oh, if you have this baby, it's going to ruin your finances. Your kids will be resentful. It's going to destroy your family." Can you just share, like, what has Tabitha done for your family and your kids?
Oh, here's what I've observed. Any special needs child, I think what they do is they accelerate the current trajectory of the family and the marriage. So if the marriage is already strong and building strong bonds, then it accelerates that closeness. For the ones that do fall apart, I think they were already drifting apart, and this special needs child accelerated that.
Interesting.
That drift. As far as the kids go, I mean, everything is dependent on our attitude and how we address things. And it's a shame that the doctors come in with this negative attitude. I mean, when the geneticist walked in the room to give us the formal diagnosis, she came in tears already. "I'm so sorry, you got a child who's going to die." And my mom was with me, and she goes, "Oh, she's so compassionate." And I'm like, no, she set us up to think this was negative, So my kids, they were, let me think, 17 and 17 to 2 at the time that she was born. And they just adore her. They take care of her. In fact, my 3 oldest, who are 23, 20, and 17, just recently came to me and said they hope that they're fortunate enough to have a special needs child someday when they're parents. And it's really taught them to be more tolerant of individuals who are different, who are struggling, be more patient and understanding with individuals who might take a little longer to do things. They gravitate towards kids who are clearly special needs, whereas other kids their age, get uncomfortable and whatnot. My 20-year-old, she's a rodeo queen, and she loves, seeing kids in wheelchairs, and she just gets, gets down on her knees and looks them in the eye and asks them what their superpower is instead of asking what their diagnosis is. I think it's been a blessing. But a lot of it really depends on, our attitude and how we present it and how we handle it.
Mm-hmm. When you were first dealing with this, when she was an infant, I'm imagining that it was worse then than now, but maybe still now. Did you get either inferred or explicit messages that trying to keep her alive was selfish because she's going to suffer?
Yeah. Well, even heart surgery. I mean, there have been people who have commented online and stuff, because we've done some other videos and interviews and stuff, but that will argue that, well, getting a child like this heart surgery is causing them to suffer. And it's like, excuse me, you're acting like they're not sedated for heart surgery, and they're not given, strong pain meds while they're recovering. There's no, it's no suffering to have the heart surgery. But the alternative is, if you don't have the heart surgery, the alternative is to slowly die of respiratory failure because your heart and lungs are overworked. Comfort care, in a lot of instances, involves reducing nutrition. So you're slowly starving the child to death as well. It's like, how is that less suffering? I mean, to go through heart surgery is a temporary traumatic experience. It's hard on the body and everything, but then you can grow and thrive after that. It's baffling to me. But and one of the things that we've learned, with dealing with people and talking to other families, is it really boils down to the eugenics ideology of the medical community.
I don't think just the medical community. I think the larger community. A lot of people cannot fathom,
absolutely.
and I'm wondering if you run into this too. A lot of people cannot fathom having a special needs child. They don't see it as anything positive, and it does that they don't see people with disability as like fully human. They may not come out and say that, but that's how they act in the long run.
Oh, absolutely. And that's what I was getting to. When there's and then I think it's worse because of the intellectual disability, because they're nonverbal. We assume that they're non-intelligent. And therefore they're a blight on society. They're a non-contributor. And, and that's one of my arguments. It's like, well, with the eugenics ideology, we want to eliminate all the imperfect, abnormalities, the genetic abnormalities. We want to eliminate those so that we can have a perfect gene pool, a perfect society. But we actually create a better society of people by embracing those individuals and caring for them, because those around them that are responsible for caring for them become better citizens, become better individuals. And it's not directly measurable. I think my kids are, destined to be much better people than they would have been without her in their lives. But yeah, there is this, and it frustrates me, even in the Christian community, among people who profess to be pro-life, it's, well, they're praying for God to take the child's life or God to miraculously make them just like every other kid. It's, it's like, well, those are two sides of the same coin. You're not advocating death, but you're sure hoping God will intervene and do it. So, and the one that really, really makes me mad is when people tell me that they're praying for her to have her chromosomes restored and for her to be a normal child. It's like, okay, are you saying God screwed up? Are you saying there's something wrong? I mean, she's just a variation of normal and she's doing fine. I mean, we pray for her every time she has an illness to overcome the illness, but to say that, she's somehow defective because she's got an extra chromosome is a little bit presumptuous.
Yeah, I think that's normal. I think that is the norm of the mindset, and it's definitely a eugenicist mindset, and it goes beyond trisomy 18. Trisomy 18 just is a bit more involved, but you can see that kids with trisomy 21 who have a much higher level of functioning usually are still subject to the same mentality. And
absolutely,
I think it's only a matter of time before pretty soon, like if you have a stroke and you get, and you're very involved, well, we might as well kill you off too, or if you have Alzheimer's, or if you're just old, and that's why the push for physician-assisted suicide is so scary to me, because I can already see that mindset when you're looking at disabled kids, and it's just then stretching a little bit more to include more and more groups of people as time goes on. And people who think that's not going to happen, I think they're naive.
Oh, and I was shocked to see that there are, 11 or 14 states in the United States that have legalized euthanasia.
Oh, yes. And mine is one of them. Okay, we just got about 1 minute left. So I want you to give them I always ask this of every mom in this situation. What advice do you have for moms who are given this prenatal diagnosis of trisomy 18 or a similarly life-limiting condition?
I would say, grieve the fact that this child's life is not going to look the way you thought it was, but embrace the fact that it's going to be different, and it's much more rewarding than you can possibly imagine. You and embrace the opportunities that it has, and if you're a believing person or not, God never intended any of us to walk this life alone. And it is a difficult journey, and I would encourage people to rely on God, rely on a supportive community. There are, like Soft and other communities out there of other families who can come alongside of you, because this is not something that anyone can venture on their own, but it is rewarding and it is worth the struggle.
Thanks so much. Well, thank you for coming on the show and sharing your story. And I hope that Tabitha and her family, all of you, your kids, your husband, and you continue to just really have a great life together. She sounds like she's in a good place. God put her in a good place. For my listeners, if you have a story to share, please contact me at info@shoutmystory.org. Thanks for listening. Choose love, choose life.